everyone, and welcome to this week's art history lesson. This week we're going to be learning about the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo. I just want to take a moment to say that this topic covers quite a lot of topics that could be quite upsetting for some folk. There's descriptions of an accident that she had, which is quite graphic. There's discussion of how miscarriage. There's a lot of talk about death as well. So if perhaps that isn't what you need today, maybe save this video for another time. I just want to give you kind of due warning about that. And if you feel it is something you're quite interested in, she is a super cool lady. I hope you enjoy this video, and here we go. So our topic today is the lovely artist Frida Kahlo. Or as I've just learned, her full name is actually Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderon. And she was born in 1907 Mexico City and lived until 1954. So she died at the quite young age of 47. And obviously living through quite an interesting time there. We've got a lot of war between those times. And Mexico played an interesting role as they quite often offered refuge for artists fleeing Europe. So it was a very interesting time in Mexico. She's a Mexican painter, known for her many portraits, self-portraits, and work inspired by the nature, artifacts, and history of Mexico. Her paintings often have a strong autobiographical elements, so she could have painted a lot of her own life, and are kind of a mix of realism, so painting things as they are, with fantasy, so with kind of more magical elements. Her work has been described as surrealist or magical realist, so she's kind of painting like an alternate reality, let's say. Her work remained relatively unknown until the late 1970s, so she wasn't particularly successful during her lifetime. She wasn't very famous. She sold some paintings, but she wasn't kind of renowned. And in the 70s, her work was rediscovered by art historians and political activists, particularly from the women's movement, but also from the LGBTQ movement. Her mother was of Spanish, but also of indigenous Mexican origin, and her father was a German refugee who was a Lutheran. She had 3 sisters, and she grew up in Mexico City. And here she is. So you already see she's got quite a distinctive outfit. You might recognise that lovely eyebrow and hair combo. So we're going to start off. I'm going to show you 3 paintings by Frida, and I just want you to kind of think about what your first impressions are, and given that they're kind of autobiographical, what do you think that they tell us about her? All right. So here's the first one. This is The Wounded Deer. It was painted in 1946 when she was 41. And at this point, she was quite bedbound. It's maybe quite interesting little tidbit there. So we've got a deer that's been kind of punctured with arrows, with her head, with some quite beautiful horns, and she's got some nice earrings on. And she's in a forest, and through the forest you can see the sea, and there's some lightning happening there. It's quite interesting. This is another one. This is called The Tree of Hope, or Arbol de Esperanza, painted in 1946 when she was 41. There we go. And on her little flag here it says Arbol de la Esperanza mantente firme. So that's kind of the Tree of Hope stands firm, stands strong. So we've got a kind of a split painting here between day and night, and there's 2 women in it. One of them is the artist herself, Frida, in a beautiful dress. She's holding a kind of a metal contraption, and behind her is a woman on a hospital bed who seems to be injured, and she's in a kind of a cracked landscape. And then lastly here we've got Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair, again from 1940 when she was 37. That's not right. Then she was 33. And here she's got some music at the top. She's sitting squarely in a chair. She's looking us right in the eye. And it seems that she's just cut off all her hair, which is now kind of lying around her. And this time she's not wearing kind of this beautiful big dress. This time she's wearing quite a masculine suit. And again, this was the 1940s, so it wouldn't be usual, particularly in Mexico, for women to be wearing men's clothing. So, I suppose one of the defining things about Frida is one, she was born with polio. Not born with polio, she had polio when she was 6, and that caused one of her legs to kind of shrivel up. And before that, she'd been quite an outgoing tomboy, kind of running around, causing havoc. And then when that happened, she had to stay at home. She was bullied, and it kind of caused her to withdraw and be more quiet. But at this point, she spends some time with her father, who was a photographer, helping him touch up pictures, helping him with his equipment, and kind of generally learning some of the skills of the trade. And then she recovered, and although her leg was never the same, she kind of continued with school. She wanted to be a doctor, and she studied hard. She had lots of friends. But then, unfortunately, in 1925, at the age of 18, she suffered a horrendous trolley accident. So a trolley is a bit like a bus, kind of bus type thing. And this had effect throughout her life. So she was in a trolley crash. Other people were injured, but she bore the worst of it. And during the crash, apparently there was someone there who was carrying some gold dust. And when they crashed, somehow through her injuries, her clothes came off. She was kind of impaled, so she was cut and bleeding and broken and naked, and then she got covered in this gold dust. So it must have been quite a striking image. And she had awful injuries from this. She had a pelvic bone that had been fractured, 3 vertebrae displaced. Her abdomen and uterus were punctured by the rail. Her spine was broken in 3 places. Her right leg was broken in 11 places. Her right foot was crushed and dislocated. Her collarbone was broken, and her shoulder was dislocated. As a result of this, she had to spend a month in hospital and 2 months recovering at home before she was able to return to kind of existing again, really, in a kind of a normal state. It was initially thought she would never walk again, but she did make not a full recovery, but a good enough recovery that she was able to walk again. And you've got to remember as well, this was 1925, so medicine wasn't the same as it is today. So it's absolutely amazing that she managed to heal and recover from all these injuries. As a treatment, she had to wear a plaster corset, which confined her to bed for the better part of 3 months. And unfortunately, she suffered long-term pain. And over her lifetime, she had a further 32 surgeries. And this painting that we've got here is called The Broken Column. And it's from 1944, and she's aged 37. So by that point, she'd have subsequent operations. She would have experienced great pain throughout her life. Her body was never the same again. It was always kind of firefighting to kind of keep her able to move around. So we've got this painting over here with this broken column, which is representing her spine. She's kind of strapped in with this metal corset. She's kind of peppered all over with nails, which is perhaps representing that awful pain. And here she's staring directly at us, and there's tears falling down her face. It's a very, very haunting image. You can definitely see what she's trying to convey. There is immense pain. And I think particularly it's the broken column down her centre, kind of like a Greek column, is very haunting. So what's this image we've got here? This image is one from later in Frida's life, and it is when she kind of was continuing to paint, even though she was in immense pain. And throughout her life, she had various setups like this to able to continue her work. So Frida, the artist, is born. So this accident kind of meant that she couldn't go to medical school, and she probably wouldn't be able to cope with the rigors of being a doctor, and you're pacing the wards and doing all this sort of stuff. And while she was confined to bed, she took up her childhood hobby of painting. And the plasters cast that she had to wear, she actually ended up decorating with the paint. She often covered them in butterflies and animals. And kind of through that, she was a bit like, well, if I can't be a doctor, maybe I'll become a medical illustrator. She really wanted to be able to be independent and to support herself. She wanted to kind of be able to define her own life, as we all do. And her once she got interested in this, her parents had a special easel made so she could paint in bed, and they kind of set up this rigorous contraption so that she had a mirror above her head so that she could paint herself, so she always had a subject. And that's kind of set the tone for the rest of her career with these self-portraits. She said, "I paint myself because I'm often alone and I am the subject that I know best." Just kind of beautiful because she created all this work, but also quite sad, you know, so often alone. That's not nice. So to begin again, painting things as she saw them and with her eyes and nothing more. So what she's, even though to us her paintings seem quite magical and fantastical and surreal, to her she was just painting her life. This is what her life was. To her it wasn't a fantasy, it was her existence. She says that painting completed her life. Over the course of her life, due to her injuries, she wasn't able to carry any children to term, so she lost 3 children, and a series of other things that she felt would have fulfilled her. But she said that painting took the place of all those things that she had been denied, and she thinks the work is her best. So here she is. She's doing a painting here in her bed. There we go. So as you said, Frida's work was intensely autobiographical, and recently some pages of her diary were published, which I don't know how I'd feel about my diary being published many years after my death, but it's happened. And here are some of the drawings from her diary, which I think are actually a bit more haunting than her paintings sometimes. I particularly like this kind of like triple face thing, but you can see kind of faces are a recurring theme here, which is quite interesting to get that kind of intimate look in. So after her accident, Frida said that she aged overnight. My friends, my companions became women slowly, but I became old in instants. So she kind of felt that the accident really robbed her of her youth, and she just kind of had to make do. And from that point, she never really was although she definitely lived a full life, as we'll get into, I think she probably a carefree element maybe she felt was taken from her. And after that, she felt that kind of death became her constant companion, and thus it entered her work. As we can see here, this painting is called Death on My Mind, and she painted it when she was 36. And kind of the placement of the skull and bones kind of above her eyebrows there is kind of almost like a kind of a third eye placement. So it's kind of like showing what is in her head, literally. So literally she has death on her mind here. And I think although kind of it was a constant for her, she kind of incorporated it in a beautiful way. And also we've got to remember that culturally, perhaps she would have had a slightly different understanding of death from what we do in the West, where we're quite divorced from death now. So perhaps kind of what that meant for her would have been slightly different for how we would interpret it. So she said, "Nothing is worth more than laughter. It is one's strength to laugh and to abandon oneself to be light. Tragedy is the most ridiculous thing." So it kind of became, because it was just this daily thing for her, she was often in pain, she was often kind of being like, "I've got to have this surgery again, is it going to work? It's the 30s, surgery isn't altogether safe." That it kind of became something like, you'll either laugh or you'll cry, and so she chose to laugh. And you've got this beautiful painting here, which again, she's in these kind of like very traditional textiles. She's got her hair done up in not a European way, but a very traditional Mexican way. And she's surrounded by these beautiful, lush leaves, which are beautiful. So here's another 2 paintings I've picked out, which again have a kind of a similarity of kind of that theme of death. So the one we've got on the left here is Child in a Death Mask. It's quite grim, you know. But again, obviously Mexico celebrates death differently. They have the Day of the Dead, kind of, they're a lot more connected to kind of spirits and ancestors and this sort of thing, something that we don't really have within our culture. So although for me, Child in a Death Mask is a bit like, whoa, that's grim, perhaps it would be different. So we've kind of got this child kind of wearing maybe a skull mask, maybe like you would on Halloween or something. And she's wearing a pretty pink dress, and she's got a nice little flower, and she's in this kind of very calming, icy landscape, these kind of blue mountains in the distance. And then on the ground, you've got this kind of monster's head, which is quite strange. And then on the right here, we've got Without Hope. I've got a typo there, Without Hope, which she painted age 38. So you've got Frida kind of confined to bed, and this wooden contraption she's got in front of her here would have been her easel, where a painting would have been. And she's almost like vomiting onto the easel, so it's kind of almost that kind of like, oh, I'm pouring everything that is within me onto the canvas. And it seems that what is in her is kind of, it looks kind of like rotting meat. And so maybe she feels kind of like rotten on the inside. She's feeling really crap. And you've got, again, this kind of skull. So you've got like a pig and a turkey and a chicken and some sausages here. Very strange, pretty weird. And you've kind of got, again, this kind of the sun and moon. So you've got a kind of duality within the painting as well. Weird, eh? Yeah. So her work was intensely autobiographical. So here you've got this piece here where she's kind of summing up a lot of her time in America and in New York. So you've got all these different things going on here. And this is a quote from her. She said, they thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. It's definitely a more interesting reality than mine. So what have we got here? We've got kind of a tower on fire. We've got a dead bird in the tree. You've kind of got, she's sitting in the bath and kind of seeing stuff in the water. You've got her parents here. You've got a lesbian couple here. You've got some traditional dress. You've kind of got all these flowers and things. There's a whole mix of, you've got some garlic, pretty weird. So you've got a whole kind of mix of different imagery, which probably would make sense if we kind of really delved into her life. It's haunting. Frida's clothing was a big draw in her work. It definitely looms large in some of the paintings we're just going to look at. She really played with fashion and used it to express herself. Throughout her life, she experimented with both male clothing, which again, it would have been a lot more controversial at the time for her to be wearing these more masculine pieces, and also with elaborate traditional Mexican clothing that she used to kind of really align herself with Mexican culture, the Mexican Revolution, communism, and to kind of distance herself from that kind of European imperial power and kind of the focus that the world had on Europe. So here we've got a variety of different clothes from her life that were shown at the V&A in an exhibition a few years ago. And then you've also got, this is her prosthetic leg from later in her life when one of her legs had to be amputated. And you can see she's got these really cool shoes with like these fantastic phoenixes on them. So she definitely had fun with kind of colour, and it looks really cool. So one of the major influences in Frida's life was when she met the love of her life and two-time husband, the famous Mexican mural artist Diego Rivera. And she met him in 1927 through the Mexican Communist Party that they were both members of. Soon after they met, she asked him to critique her paintings. And although although he was kind of the more famous artist, because Frida wasn't famous in her lifetime, he was very famous and kind of like one of the figureheads of the Mexican mural movement. He was one of the people to revive the traditional art of murals in Mexico, and he had success throughout America. He painted a mural for the Rockefellers, and he got lots of commissions from the Mexican government. And even though he had all this and she was kind of painting and selling the odd painting here, throughout his life, he maintained that she was the greater artist. So let's have a wee look at some of Diego's work. So this is a mural that he did in the Grand Palace in Mexico City, which is kind of for the government. So this is a post-revolutionary Mexican government, and it wasn't leftist enough for many of the Mexican muralists, and they were always trying to force kind of their left politics through, not force, but display their left politics in their murals. So you've kind of got lots of, scenes of workers and that sort of thing, kind of a whole range of stuff going on here. You've got kind of indigenous Mexicans here, you've got warring conquistadors, it's all happening. Here's another one, this one's called A Sunday Morning, and here you've got this kind of the central figure who's, well, I can't remember her name now, but she's quite an icon in Mexico, because she's this living skeleton, and beside her you've got Frida. Here she is, so she's holding a little yin and yang, which is quite interesting. So Diego's really famous for the kind of these really big crowd scenes, and he painted these all over Mexico. The muralists really kind of took over a lot of walls and were kind of really trying to inspire Mexican pride. So the couple married in 1929, and they spent the late 20s and early 30s traveling Mexico and the United States together. So this is a painting that Frida did of the couple for their marriage. So she is in traditional Mexican dress. She's kind of holding her scarf around her, and there's this dove above, which is saying, holding this little ribbon, which says, "On the day of our marriage, on this 1927, da da da." And then here you go, you've got Diego kind of dwarfing her. He was a really big man, he was huge. He's in this kind of big, boxy, very European suit. And I think it's very interesting that he is the one that's holding the palette and the paintbrushes. Even though they were both artists, she's kind of given him that status here in this picture. So let's have a look at them in real life. So here they are. So you can see them. Frida's maybe made him a bit more handsome in her painting. Those rosy tinted goggles of love. So they were definitely an odd couple. And Frida's mother once famously described them as the elephant and the dove. So she kind of saw him as this big, like, plodding, hulky man. And her delicate Frida, her child who's kind of survived through so much and kind of is really precious to her, is this dove is now with this elephant. And Frida often also referred to Diego as her toad, which is a lovely pet name to have. Oh, my lovely toad. So Frida's mother, as you may be able to tell by the elephant analogy, was against the match, as Diego was 20 years older than Frida and had already been married twice and had kind of had a reputation as a womanizer. But on the other hand, her father was pleased as Diego was very rich and he would be able to support Frida better than her family would be, because actually, although Frida definitely came from kind of a middle-class background, her medical bills were very, very high, and her father's income couldn't keep up with all of that. So he was kind of quite pleased that her future was kind of secured there. They were both unfaithful during the marriage, and they both were kind of very free sexually, but Diego definitely hurt Frida with a lot of his infidelity. And he said that he was incapable of monogamy. Quite a bold assertion to make to the women that you love. And they separated and had, they actually divorced in 1939 after he slept with her sister Christina, which is, a big no-no. Like, have affairs, yes, but maybe don't have affairs with the person's sister. But their separation wasn't long because, they were a really powerful artistic duo, and although they weren't faithful to each other, they were very much in love with each other and felt that they couldn't exist fully without each other, and they remarried in 1940. So it was a tempestuous relationship, to say the least. But Frida was very much besotted. She definitely loved wholeheartedly. She seems like she would have been a lovely wife, very devoted. She would often bring Diego his sandwiches and stuff, and then cook him nice meals, and just generally really, really, really loved him. So you can tell here from this painting called Diego on My Mind, where again she's got him kind of placed in her third eye. So he's literally on her mind, and she's dressed in this kind of like bridal outfit with this fabulous flowers, and there's kind of all these roots coming out. So it's kind of like she's a bulb. I think she's like a little bulb underground, and she's kind of thinking of Diego, and then she's going to burst forth and flower. And then she's also got this piece here in this frame that she made for Diego on one of their anniversaries. So here's a close-up of the image within there. So they're she's got them painted side by side, like they're two halves of a whole. And they're they're in a bulb sort of thing. So you've kind of got these roots growing out. So they're kind of like one entity, and they're growing out and living together. And she's around that. She's also got a moon and a sun, and then some more shells. Yeah, she definitely loves it. It almost looks like a heart, even. It kind of looks like a bulb that's growing, but also like a heart. It's like the center of the nervous system that's like growing out the way. So, Frida was bisexual, so she's a big figure for the the LGBT movement, hence a lot of her kind of coming to fame in the 70s, and because there was kind of this big exile of people to Mexico, and also she kind of was traveling in quite golden circles when she was in America, because she was with the famous Diego. She met and became lovers with many very interesting people, including Georgia O'Keeffe, the artist and painter here, Josephine Baker, who was kind of a famous performer in Paris, Nicholas Murray, who was a photographer, Leon Trotsky, the very same, Dolores Del Rio, famous actor, Simone Noguchi, again, a sculptor, Paulette Goddard, another kind of golden age of Hollywood actress, and the famous singer Shivala Varga. So she definitely kind of lived her life to the fullest and had kind of many passionate romances. And it wasn't uncommon for actually her to have relationships with some of the women that Diego had affairs with. So it sounds like a very complicated situation, but they made it work, you know. So here we've got a painting with showing off kind of some of Frida's beautiful clothing. And this one kind of shows some of her kind of conflicts around her dual identity as quite European and kind of benefiting from her husband, who's making money from the Americas, and also her kind of her Mexican identity that she identified with more. So you've kind of got these two Fridas here. They're connected by a vein in between their hearts, but the European Frida seems to be bleeding out. She's not going to be the living Frida. So here, the European Frida is trying to stop the bleeding here, but here, the Mexican Frida, her little, her vein kind of attaches to a little picture of Diego as a child. So kind of, she feels she gets her strength from her partner, and she feels like the Mexican Frida was kind of the healthier one there, I suppose. A lot of Frida's inspiration also came from her garden. She kept a beautiful garden. She also kept a beautiful home. Her famous home now, La Casa Azul, or the Blue House, is now a museum dedicated to her. And she had many people to stay here, many great parties, beautiful garden, and she kind of she planted a lot of very kind of Mexican plants. It wasn't like I'm going to have a beautiful hothouse garden of all these foreign plants that is quite often as we do in Britain, where she was like, no, I'm going to have cactuses. I'm going to have all these beautiful things from the forest, and I'm going to bring kind of the nature of Mexico and have it in my house. And she once said, I paint flowers so they will not die. It's quite beautiful. So here's a few of her paintings that are kind of featuring flora and fauna. So we've got the flower of life here. And then we've also got the love embrace of the universe, the earth, and Diego, me, and Senor Zotl, which is a Mexican kind of pre-Spanish invasion god. So here you've kind of got nature, and this is kind of almost like a womb here. And as we know that Frida really struggled, she really wanted children, but she wasn't able to have them. So you kind of got her kind of identifying that with these flowers. And then here you've got her nursing Diego, surrounded kind of by all this beautiful Mexican flora and fauna. So it's kind of very connected to the earth and nature and kind of honouring the earth and all that sort of thing. And then here's another one called Roots, where she's actually got like the plant growing out of her. It's flying out of her. So it's almost like she's flowering and connected to the earth. So it's very much about kind of being connected to the land and feeling part and parcel of the countryside, if that makes sense. She also kept many pets. So not only did she have this fabulous garden, she also kept many pets, and she liked to kind of paint herself in these portraits with them. And these are perhaps the ones that you'll be most familiar with, possibly because they're the most commercial ones. So if people are kind of making Frida merchandise, they're not going to put the ones, you know, where she's bleeding, and they're going to put these ones on because they're quite nice. So this is her two paintings of her with her monkeys. She had many pet monkeys. And again, we've got these beautiful flora and fauna behind her. You've got this kind of bird of paradise flower here and all these lush leaves. And here we've got two more where we've got a self-portrait with small monkey. Again, small monkey, you've got this lovely kind of very, this is a type of dog which is indigenous to Mexico. And again, a kind of a pre-Columbian figure here. And here we've got her with her parrots. So as we kind of already mentioned, Frida was a big old communist. Communism was maybe her biggest love in life. Maybe she loved communism more than she loved Diego, hard to tell, and she really loved Diego. So communism and the People's Revolution of Mexico were her great life passion. She often said that she'd often change her birth year to have it coincide with the Mexican Revolution. And for her and for many of her comrades and associates, the post-revolution government wasn't leftist enough, and they fought for more of the people's rights. She often said, "I must fight with all my strength so the little positive things that my health allows me to do might be pointed towards helping the revolution, the only real reason for living." That's a big chat. She even sheltered Trotsky when he sought asylum in Mexico. Diego, when Trotsky was kicked out of Denmark, Diego went and appealed personally to the president, saying, "Please give Trotsky asylum here." And they housed them in Frida's father's house. Trotsky was seen as the kind of natural successor to Lenin after Lenin died, but then Stalin was like, "I think that should be me," and kind of lots of people in the party turned against Trotsky, and he had to kind of flee across Europe, kind of seeking asylum in various countries before getting kind of assaults on his life. And he eventually ended up in Mexico, where Frida and him had a love affair, even though he was there with his wife, who had fled with him from Russia, put up with all this rubbish. He then had an affair with Frida. Nice of you, Trotsky. And they had an affair, but unfortunately he was finally assassinated in Mexico. She aligned herself with Trotskyism, but later broke with its ideology and was more sympathetic to Stalin. Cool. So here's a picture of her on a kind of a rally, on a march. And then here is a picture of her in a corset that she painted. This was kind of another one of her plaster casts that she created. So here's the black and white version, and then here's a magically touched up modern version. So you can see where her heart is. She's got a hammer and sickle, love it. And then later down here, she's got kind of a baby in her womb, which is obviously very sad if you look at her life. And then here is a painting that she made for Trotsky and gave to him. And here in this note, it says, dedicated to Trotsky on the 7th of November, I love you with all my heart, Frida. Cool. So it's kind of, you see the pose is very similar to her marriage portrait with Diego. She's holding flowers, definitely looks quite wedding-y. She's got a similar shawl on, the background colour is the same. She's looking directly at us, she's got beautiful makeup on, she's got her hair done gorgeously. So it seems like she really liked Trotsky, to say the least. And then here is one of the paintings, her last painting. I think this is her second last painting that she ever did here. And this is called Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick. So by the sick, I mean, she probably knows that that was perhaps herself. So maybe there's kind of recording how she felt that kind of the teachings of Marx had helped her throughout her life. You've got kind of a dove of peace over the world here. And then my favorite bit, because it's also subtle, is Marx here with a hand coming out the side of his head, strangling an American bald eagle with the head of Uncle Sam. So she wasn't going for subtlety with this one, shall we say. Interesting to say the least. And then this is the last painting that Frida ever did, and it's called Viva La Vida, which you may know from the Coldplay song means long live life, or live life, I think. And she passed away in 1954 at the age of 47 after becoming increasingly bedbound. One of the last things she did before she died was she attended her final exhibition, which was her first exhibition ever in Mexico. And she was kind of advised by her doctor not to go, and she was like, I am going. And they arranged for her to have her taken in her bed. So she was kind of wheeled in, fully glammed up in all her regalia. All over the head of her bed, she had plastered pictures of her and Diego. It was very dramatic. So this is her last painting. And then her, the final entry in her diary reads, I hope the exit is joyful and I hope never to return. And there we go. And that's the life and work of Frida Kahlo. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found that a little bit informative and hopefully not too upsetting. I really recommend you check out some more of her work. There's so much more that we didn't cover in this video, and I'll put some links below for more information. I also recommend that you watch the very Hollywood film made by Salma Hayek called Frida, which is class. It's very dramatic, but it's good anyway. And I hope you join us next week where we'll be learning about MC Escher.